want to get some reaction to some of the solutions that have been talked about here. And Molly, before the show, we were talking about the nonprofit model, and you had some things to say about that.
Well, we were just simply talking about the various nonprofits that have come about. Rich mentioned.
Is it a viable model? I mean, can we get enough nonprofits to take the place of this?
I don't believe it's a model that will replace the model that we've depended on for the last 150 years. However, it is a good supplement to ensure that there is investigative journalism out there. So it's a great idea, and it's something that we should support, but is it the end-all be-all answer? No. There is no magic bullet for funding journalism in the future, but nonprofit journalism certainly has added a lot to the mix, and is just one of hopefully many options for funding journalism in the future.
Well, the other thing too is that we're all journalists. We've all been journalists for a very long time, but it doesn't necessarily.
Some of us longer than others.
Some of us longer than others. But nobody's entitled to make a living as a journalist. And I think the important thing is that journalism happens, not that people are able to buy houses doing it. I think that the shift that's going on is we're going from this established profession where people went to Columbia Journalism School and then went to graduate school. And what they don't mention in the video is that I know people who went to Columbia graduate school and they ended up spending the next 10 years paying off student loans at jobs making not as much money as they might have hoped having gone to Columbia Journalism School. My point is that journalism, the important thing is to do journalism so that the news gets out there. If people make a living doing it, that's great. If people end up doing it part-time, that's also good too, as long as the journalism is good. It may be that people, there are journalists who have done other things. They're traditionally, they're who are doctors or who have traveled and do it as part of traveling. I don't know. Help me here. I'm just saying.
Well,
I think that the focus on professionalism and making money being a journalist is a little old school.
But can you do the investigative work that needs to be done if it's just 3 paid people and a bunch of volunteers?
Let me jump in there because I would submit that this is a lot like the old movie system. For decades you had the big movie companies that made everything, and they controlled every aspect of it. And then when that system died, I'm sure there were people then that thought, oh my gosh, TV's going to destroy movies, and now the actors are off the plantation and it's all going to be horrible, and that isn't what's happened. What you've seen is, now, a very vigorous independent film community, and not just, the schlock. Anybody can go out and make some cheap slasher movie, and you see those for sure. But you also see a lot of great documentary work that people aren't getting rich off of. They're doing it because they want to tell these very important stories. So, I don't know if it's a completely solid comparison, but I think it should give us a little hope that you don't always have to be part of the studio system to make something work.
And that journalism is a passion that people have. People do it whether they, people go into journalism not to make a great living. Again, as I said before, I think that, just why people play music, to use another analogy. People play music, and Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney never thought that they were going to be knighted or multi-millionaires. They did it because they loved it.
Right, but maybe I'm naive, but I go back to my college days where it was easy to get people to write movie reviews and do theater criticisms, but it was hard to get somebody to go to government meetings and do information requests and stick with it day in and day out and hold their feet to the fire. That's what I'm questioning whether or not it's going to happen.
There are people who love doing that stuff, though. I'm not one of them, but there are people who really like doing that, too.
We're going to sort of start to move into our wrap-up phase here. We're going to go around the table and get sort of our closing thoughts. We've got 5 minutes left in the show. Michelle, I'm throwing you to you.
Fire? Okay. Closing thoughts. I still agree with everyone at this table that journalism is an exciting field. It is challenging. And like you said earlier, it was never an easy field. You have to be passionate. You have to love it. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty, because you're not going to get that New York Times jobs right away. It's a job you have to work at, and if you love it and you're willing to experiment and embrace the way the industry is changing, it will be exciting for you.
Judy?
I will just say that I love what I do every day, and in the 10 years that I've been doing it, it actually hasn't changed that much. Fundamentally, I'm still going out to be a bearer of news and disseminating news. Whether it's the format might have changed. I do things over Twitter, over Facebook, over the internet now. In a way, things are more like The Wire today. But it's still so important for us to figure out a model that works for news organizations, a revenue generating model, and that's what we're trying to figure out, and it hasn't been sorted out, and so it's uncomfortable right now, and it's frustrating, it's nerve-wracking, but it will probably end up being a little bit of everything. You might see some of the nonprofits work and different local organizations focused on their community's news. You'll see diversity. We don't know how the landscape will look, but it will not look what it did before.
Well, I think that's the biggest thing we would all agree on, is that we don't know what it's going to look like. But actually, as we've talked about a lot here, I think there are a lot more. I mean, it used to be if you didn't get that job at the New York Times, you were off to Poughkeepsie or where have you, and if you didn't get a newspaper job, well, not to insult my PR friends, but maybe you end up in PR or what have you. I mean, I think now if you want to do journalism, you can. Now, your question is totally valid. How do you fund investigative reporting? That's definitely going to be by far the biggest challenge, because it's the most expensive thing to do. That's why I think at some point what has to be figured out is the advertising revenue. There's nothing really to replace that at this point. You can replace the content providers, the models will change, but you got to find a way to get the dollars and cents to the people that do that, and that's going to be the biggest challenge. So I think we're going to really be looking at the advertising world to come up with technologies that make these things happen.
Quickly.
Overall, I'm optimistic about the future of journalism. However, I do have some concern that with having to post constantly, with the immediate need for news, with the appetite that if something happened 2 minutes ago, we have to get it out there, that journalists aren't able to include as much context and aren't able to look backwards or look forward in the same way anymore in some of their news articles. But overall, I'm pretty optimistic about the future, because there will be different models emerging. But as Judy said, I loved your word uncomfortable, because that's exactly what it is right now, because we don't know how we're going to be making money off of doing journalism in 5 years or even in next year.
Dave, quick, 15 seconds.
It's an exciting time, and it's going to continue to be exciting, and that means being uncomfortable, but that also means lots of new opportunities, and we're in a whole new environment, and it's still very, very young.
Well, I appreciate you all being here, and I appreciate you all watching it. Again, I'm Ed Fletcher with the Sacramento Bee, and I hope we endure this uncomfortable period and keep holding people's feet to the fire. Thanks again for watching.